Imagine that after a ruined marriage and feeling like your life is a mess, you return to Korea without any hope. However, life can be funny sometimes, and an old flame begins to rekindle for your former neighbor. The story begins with a group of mothers hiking. Hae-suk constantly brags about her son, who is a successful architect, while Mi-suk talks about her daughter's wedding and how close she is to famous people, but she also doesn't miss a chance to mention how successful Suk-ryu is in his profession. Meanwhile, at the airport, the protagonist arrives without telling anyone except her best friend, Moum, who came to pick her up. After spending some time together, Moum suggests preparing a surprise with balloons for Suk-ryu to do with his family. However, just before they ring the doorbell, Moum gets called into work and has to leave her friend hanging. So, the protagonist continues wandering the neighborhood alone until she accidentally runs into Sung-hyo, her childhood best friend and former neighbor. Even though he teases Suk-ryu, Sung-hyo helps her hide when their mothers approach, and from their playful banter, you can tell their relationship will be fun to watch. Knowing his friend well, Sung-hyo advises the protagonist to face the problem she's hiding from her family right away. After all, he knows that the longer she delays, the harder the slaps from her mother will be, and the longer the silent treatment will last. In the next scene, we see the emergency Moum was called to at work, where she proves to be a great paramedic. A journalist nearby, impressed by her skills, even asks for her number after things calm down, but Moum just ignores him. Back to the protagonist. Before meeting her family, knowing that some slaps might be coming, she decides to put on all the coats in her suitcase to soften the blows. Even so, Suk-ryu gets a close-up view of his mother's fury when, not realizing she's nearby, he mentions that her marriage was called off and that she quit her job to return to Korea with no apparent plan. Actually, the one who suffered most was Sung-hyo, who, trying to calm Mi-suk, stepped between the two but ended up getting hit himself. Despite all this, he's happy that his friend is back, and now things are sure to get a lot more lively. Going back to the past, we see that the protagonist used to spend most of her time with Sung-hyo, and whenever she had a bit of her salary left over, she would buy a little gift for her mother. Now, returning to the present, we see the conversation Mi-suk had with her daughter the night before. The reason for all these sudden decisions was that Suk-ryu was tired of always having to push herself. She was always the top student, then the best on her team, which earned her a good position at her company, and she was the perfect wife. However, as we all know, there comes a time in life when you need to slow down. But her mother doesn't take her daughter's words very well. The funny thing about this situation is that Mi-suk has developed a habit. Whenever her anger reaches a certain level, she goes down to the basement and vents her feelings by playing the drums. Throughout the day, we follow the headquarters of the company that Sung-hyo is building. It will be a building for his partners and architects' offices, but before the grand opening, he receives bad news. One of his projects will have to be postponed due to a lack of resources. Meanwhile, the protagonist is upset to discover that her mother is ashamed of her, since the gossip has already spread. Because of this, Suk-ryu promises not to attend her best friend's company opening, so the neighbors won't talk about Mi-suk. Switching to Sung-hyo, we see him being interviewed by that journalist who had fallen for Moum, proving once again how small the world really is. In the next scene, our protagonist is on a bus when memories start to resurface. One of them is at a party, where she's surprised to see a man kissing another woman. Could this have been Suk-ryu's ex? Later, the protagonist returns home with a pomegranate tree and gives it to Sung-hyo, who keeps her gift in his office. The next day is the opening of Sung-hyo's company, and even though Suk-ryu said she wouldn't attend, she goes to the event just to give her mother a gold brooch she had been looking for earlier, the same brooch the protagonist had given her mother many years ago. However, at that moment, Suk-ryu realizes that Mi-suk is ashamed of her. After all, her mother had made up several lies to her old school friends, and of course, this upsets the protagonist. But when mother and daughter arrive home, the tension between them gets even worse, as Mi-suk tries to force her daughter to pack her bags and return to the United States. At that point, Sukryu opens up, saying that she's always pushed herself to be the best at everything, to the point where she barely slept all these years, which is why she now spends most of her days resting. What hurts the protagonist the most, though, is that her mother doesn't even try to understand her and is always the first to point a finger instead of offering a shoulder to lean on. The fight between the two ends with Sukryu asking Mi-suk why her mother's happiness depends on her success. And I think it's only now that Mi-suk finally opens her eyes and sees that her daughter isn't okay. The next day, she asks Sung-hyo for help redecorating the protagonist's room and starts treating her much better. Meanwhile, Sukryu goes to the playground, a place she chose to de-stress. In a conversation with Sung-hyo, he admits he's afraid his company might go bankrupt, since there are still many gaps to fill and, when it comes to money, things are always uncertain. When Sukryu sees her newly redecorated room, you can see on her face how much she loved the surprise. I think another feeling that came up was that now she has a safe haven to escape her problems. But the surprises don't stop there. Sung-hyo decides to move back in with his parents, which means the two will once again be window neighbors. In the next scene, we go back in time and see a swimming competition that Sung-hyo is about to take part in. But this isn't just any competition, it's the Federation Finals. Since his family couldn't be there because of work, the only one cheering for Sung-hyo when he won first place was Sukryu. Back in the present, the protagonist runs into her high school teacher by chance at her parents' restaurant. To help her with her groceries, Sukryu accompanies her back to the school. During their conversation, we see that the teacher, who is now the principal, doesn't know about Sukryu's resignation and divorce. But since the woman spoke with such enthusiasm, Sukryu decided not to tell the truth at that moment, and soon the two ran into Sung-hyo. The man is at the school to apply to be the one in charge of the building's interior design project. Knowing how much he loves that pool that brought him so many opportunities, Sung-hyo is truly determined to win. Later, the two take advantage of being at their old school to look for a time capsule they made, but they just end up getting dirty, since they can't find it. In the next scene, Sung-hyo is presenting a project, but ends up arguing with his clients when they admit they want a copy of another building. Instead of the partners reaching an agreement, things get even worse as they argue in front of everyone. The reason for this is that Sung-hyo refuses to plagiarize, while his partner argues that, at the moment, they don't have the luxury of choosing. Meanwhile, Moum is at work when she suddenly receives several rice cakes sent by that journalist who's fallen for her, though she still hasn't realized who sent them. Back to the protagonist, Sukryu is called in for a job interview as soon as she gets back from her trip, which means there are already many people interested in the talented protagonist. Right after the interview, Sukryu runs into Sung-hyo, and during their conversation, he asks if she really wants to keep working in the same field. Sukryu is pretty confused about what to do, and being a bit selfish, she tells her friend that he'll never understand her life, since he's always had a perfect one. However, she quickly regrets saying that, because years ago, before Sung-hyo could qualify for the Olympics, he was hit by a careless driver and his dream was shattered, since he could never compete again. The next day, Sung-hyo apologizes to his partner for how he acted in front of the clients, and now he's left thinking about what Sukryu said, since she was right when she said he's always had privileges. As for the protagonist, to de-stress, she decides to go to the school at night to look for the time capsule by herself. When the principal finds her, Sukryu thinks it's a good time to open up about how her life is going. The principal is a bit surprised, but completely understands the choices she's made. After all, she's known Sukryu since she was young, and the girl never had an easy temperament when things didn't go as planned. Later, Sukryu heads to the school pool to meet her friend, who's also there. The two end up making up and having some fun together, even reminiscing about the time when Sung-hyo was recovering from his accident and Sukryu kept him company every day. In the protagonist's letter that was in the time capsule, she only talked about herself. In Sung-hyo's letter, however, he confessed that he had always had feelings for his friend. However, Later on we see that Sung-hyo didn't allow Suk-ryu to read his letter, and the man even feels embarrassed about his past self for having left such an obvious clue about his feelings. The next day, while the pair are in Sung-hyo's office, Mr. Myung-woo brings fantastic news for the company's growth. Grape, the former company where the protagonist worked and a major player in the market, is going to build a headquarters in Korea. So, they contacted Myung-woo asking for a design for the new building, along with 4 other offices, and the one they like best will be chosen. Even though Sung-hyo knows that just hearing the name Grape affects his best friend, this is an opportunity they can't miss, and since Suk-ryu is the only one in the room who speaks fluent English, she ends up becoming part of the project. Meanwhile, Mi-suk and Hae-suk have dinner together and complain about their partners, while their husbands do the same. Moving on to MOUM, she realizes how small Korea can be when she runs into that journalist again. At that moment, she starts to suspect who sent her the rice cakes, and when Sung-hyo arrives with Suk-ryu, things get even stranger, since in a way it seems like everyone has met Dan-ho at some point. But what bothers MOUM the most is how similar her tastes are to the journalists. Later, the trio is walking home when the protagonist brings up the time capsule, and at that moment, Sung-hyo freezes upon discovering that MOUM had dug up the object earlier and read the letters, which means his friend probably knows about his feelings for Suk-ryu. However, since MOUM doesn't mention it, he just suffers in silence. The next day, during an online meeting, Suk-ryu sets up a meeting with the Grape representative. However, after her friends leave the call and only the protagonist remains, she overhears the representative, who forgot to turn off her microphone, talking to the coordinator about how they've already chosen the winner, meaning her friends will just be wasting time putting together the whole project. Because of this, Suk-ryu can't keep the secret and soon tells her best friend, who, although a bit shaken by the news, thinks it's best to act as if he doesn't know anything, so at least they can try and also not hurt Myung-woo. Meanwhile, the journalist has recently moved to the house across from MOUM's, so he ends up meeting the trio's mothers, and they're all impressed by his manners and good looks. Since we're talking about MOUM, she's at the park enjoying her day off when she suddenly meets a little girl who's a lot like her as a child in terms of loving aliens, which makes MOUM try hard to win the child over and become her friend. Later on, we switch to Dan-ho, who is still unpacking boxes from the move, and among the memories, he finds a photo that makes him recognize the protagonist. It turns out that a few years ago, the journalist photographed that competition where Sung-hyo took first place, and among the photos was the pair. Dan-ho immediately sent the memory to Sung-hyo, who was happy to receive it, and it even encouraged him to make up with his friend. The time for the meeting with Grape arrived, and things would have gone smoothly if the protagonist's former boss hadn't been there. As soon as Suk-ryu saw Chris, Sung-hyo already knew something was wrong. The man had mistreated the protagonist a lot at Grape, he was even one of the reasons she quit. Overloading Suk-ryu was just one of the many things he did, including making disgusting comments. Because of this, our dear protagonist was unsettled remembering everything and had to take a break to go to the bathroom. As Suk-ryu was returning to the meeting room, Chris was in the hallway, and fortunately, he brought up the subject. I say fortunately because, right after, seeing his best friend falling apart with a mix of emotions because of this guy who kept disrespecting her, Sung-hyo confronted Chris, which ended up revealing this darker side of him to the rest of the Grape staff. Suk-ryu didn't let Sung-hyo punch the man, in fact, she handled it herself. Myung-woo, taking advantage of the fact that he follows Grape's partner on Instagram and interacts a lot with him, sent the audio from the meeting where Chris admitted to everything bad he had done to our protagonist. All these accumulated events led to Chris losing his job, and the office came out ahead because, even though they didn't get the main contract, Grape gave them a smaller project for a store that will be built. To top off the day, Sung-hyo takes his friend to a bridge where people put locks, usually with the couple's names written on them and the key thrown away. However, this time, he wrote down everything bad he wished would happen to Chris and those who mistreated his friend, and then locked it, as if it were a curse, which made the protagonist, and me, laugh sincerely. The next day, Sukryu is once again in Sunghyo's office. It almost seems like she works there now. But suddenly, while they were talking, a woman arrived and hugged the man, leaving both the protagonist and Sunghyo surprised. From the way Mr. Myung-woo talks to the woman, it seems she is Sunghyo's ex who left him at the time to be with another man. Tae-hui is there to offer a project to Sunghyo, which, under pressure from his partner, he ends up accepting. Sukryu updates us on the man's relationship with this person. They dated when Sunghyo was in college, and as mentioned before, she left him to be with another guy. Later, while heading home and deep in thought about his day, Sunghyo ran into Sukryu's father, who invited him for a drink, and he accepted. As a result, he ended up sleeping at the protagonist's house, and when he woke up the next day with the woman hitting him, because she thought she was waking up her brother, in his panic, Sunghyo ended up hitting his foot on the wardrobe and tearing a ligament. Feeling somewhat responsible for what happened to her friend, Sukryu spends the whole day accompanying him to all his appointments to make sure he'll be okay. This leads the two of them to meet with Tae-hui, since the meeting was already scheduled and Sunghyo couldn't leave her hanging. Then, at a certain moment, when the two were alone and Sukryu was distracted, we see Tae-hui confessing to the man that she still feels attracted to him. Meanwhile, Moum went to respond to an emergency, and when she arrived, it was that little girl she had met in the park. The child was home alone and burning with fever, so she was rushed to the hospital. And when her guardian arrived at the emergency room in a panic, Moum was surprised to find out it was Dan-ho. Back to the former couple, while they were talking alone again, after Tae-hui and Sukryu had become good friends, the woman revealed the real reason she broke up with Sunghyo. Tae-hui always felt like she liked him more than he liked her, so she went looking for someone who would reciprocate her feelings in the same way. And continuing the conversation, Sunghyo finally started to realize that he has always loved Sukryu, and that feeling continues to this day. This topic carries on the next day, because when the protagonist entered Sunghyo's room while he was in the shower, she found the letter he had written to put in the time capsule. In other words, now she knows about her friend's feelings, even though Sunghyo tries to excuse what's written as just a joke. Well, as the day goes on, Sukryu focuses on what she wants to do with her life now, and since she has always loved cooking, she decides to pursue this path by enrolling in some classes to learn more. Meanwhile, Sunghyo decides to avoid the protagonist after her new discovery, so the architect meets up with the journalist to pass the time and even ends up venting about his feelings in an indirect way. The next day, we see Sunghyo at a gathering with former co-workers, but before the night ends, he notices that Sukryu's father is also there, accompanied by another woman. After thinking it over, Sunghyo decides to talk to him. In the same episode, the reason comes up. It seems that Gun-sik needs money because he was scammed by two YouTubers who went to his restaurant and made a misleading video, putting hair in the food and even accusing him of pouring hot water on them, when in reality it was just an accident. Because of this, Gun-sik became a rideshare driver to cover the payment the YouTubers demanded, but his absence from the restaurant led to overdue bills, which caused the family to find out soon after Sunghyo caught him that day. So, even though her father told her not to get involved, the next day the protagonist goes after camera footage to prove the YouTuber's scam, but Sunghyo was already one step ahead. He exposed the two guys and even brought the journalist along to threaten to do a story about their scam. Of course, the two tried to run away, but Sukryu and her brother showed up to help. Even after going through this together, Sunghyo keeps his distance from the protagonist, and she can't understand where she went wrong in their friendship. Then, when Sukryu finally realizes that her friend has always liked her and is ready to talk about it, her ex returns to Korea and finds the two of them in the middle of the street. Hyunjun arrives saying he missed the protagonist and therefore decided to return to Korea to win her back. Then, Sunghyo, who was about to talk about what he had felt almost his entire life for her, begins to question Hyunjun's presence and tries to push him away. However, as soon as the protagonist's family appears, it's over, and the former couple is dragged home, leaving only Sunghyo behind. After feeding her former son-in-law, Misuk begins questioning Hyunjun. We then discover that the protagonist had indeed lied about cheating on him, which was the only thing stopping the lady from wanting to end the man. Now, in Mi-suk's view, the breakup of the marriage was his fault. This prompts Suk-ryu to quickly take Hyun-jun out of the place. Meanwhile, Sung-hyo and Moum were drinking when suddenly, after hearing his friend whining and getting tired of his words, she lets slip that she knows about the man's past love for the protagonist. Moum also adds that he should act quickly and that only Sung-hyo can save himself from this kept secret. Later, Suk-ryu decides to sleep at Moum's house, and in the middle of the night, while unable to sleep, the two begin discussing the protagonist's ex-fiancé. Suk-ryu's feelings for the man are complicated. She cherishes the time and achievements they shared but feels it's time to end the relationship. The next day, Mi-suk begins her plan to reunite her daughter and former son-in-law, so she forces Suk-ryu to leave the house more dressed up and texts the man to have him wait for her. However, Mi-suk didn't count on Sung-hyo also waiting for Suk-ryu, giving the protagonist the perfect excuse to escape Hyun-jun. Meanwhile, Moum goes into rescue mode after witnessing an accident during her lunch break, and since Yeon-do was there with her father at that moment, the little girl starts admiring Moum, slightly changing her view of the woman who had scolded her father that day at the hospital. Thus, Moum ends up spending the rest of her day with the father and daughter and consequently realizes her feelings for the man. Returning to the protagonist, in the evening, while going out for some air, she bumps into Sung-hyo, and as he decides to accompany her, he takes advantage of the moment alone to confess his feelings for her. Suk-ryu kind of expected this after reading that letter. However, she was honest when she explained that her life is a mess right now, so she doesn't want to ruin a relationship that could be the best thing to ever happen to her at another time. Thus, Suk-ryu asks for some time to respond to Sung-hyo's feelings, but she makes it clear that she doesn't want to get back with her ex-fiancé, in case that worries him. The next day is Sung-hyo's mother's birthday, but she spends the day waiting to receive something from her son and husband, which unfortunately took a while to arrive. Anyway, in the evening, Hae-suk was very happy when her friends threw her a surprise party. But we viewers also see that her husband had planned to give her flowers. However, after seeing his wife talking outside the house with her colleague, with whom she supposedly had an affair, at least that's what the story suggests, he decided against celebrating with Hae-suk. Sung-hyo even leaves a beautiful necklace for his mother on her dresser, but he didn't realize it was identical to one she already had. Nonetheless, she is very happy to be remembered by her beloved son. Focusing back on the protagonist, she ends up having lunch with her ex-fiancé after he pleaded a lot, and Sung-hyo is at a table nearby with Tae-hui. It's clearly written all over Sung-hyo's face that he is full of jealousy seeing them together, especially when Hyun-jun starts praising the protagonist and commenting on how much he missed her. Later that day, Sung-hyo decides to reflect around the pool of his old school. The place became even more comforting after discovering he won the renovation contest. The next day, Moum is surprised to find Dan-ho at her work. It turns out that the journalist decided to write an article about the real work of rescuers day to day, and he will accompany her. Meanwhile, Suk-ryu and Sung-hyo decided that the deadline for the protagonist to give her answer about her feelings toward him will be 11 days. This decision was actually made based on the shortest expiration date of milk they found at the convenience store. Later, we see that Hyun-jun changed his strategy to win the protagonist over. Now he decides to redo some steps from the beginning of their relationship, like bringing her the first drink he bought her, which is jasmine tea. Suk-ryu continues with her cooking classes. However, when she was leaving the school, her mother saw her, and as soon as she got home, her father, along with her mother, confronted her. Gun-sik ended up calling his daughter an intelligent fool upon hearing her say she wanted to pursue this field. Now, it seems they finally understood, even if they don't like or agree with it, that she wants to live in Korea permanently. Until then, they both thought it was a temporary phase and that Suk-ryu would soon return to working in her field, putting all her knowledge to use. Taking advantage of this conversation, Sukryu decided to express what she had kept inside for all these years about the different treatment she received compared to her brother. Since he was born with a small hole in his heart, which healed as he grew, her brother was always treated like a fragile doll, which meant no one ever said no to him. So, growing up with this treatment, Sukryu thought she should always do her best and take care of herself, so as not to bring more worries to the family. But even after years and her brother no longer having this problem, her parents continue to be unfair to her. Later, Sukryu left the house upset, and Sung-hyo, who was in the living room during the argument, decided to take his friend for a walk to de-stress. He tried to help her understand her parents' side, even though she wasn't entirely wrong in her perspectives. In the end, he offered her the kitchen at his company to practice her culinary skills. Thus, the next day after her class, Sukryu headed to Sung-hyo's company. However, Hyun-jun soon appeared, and he decided he wanted to hire Sung-hyo's team for his parents' house project in Korea. Obviously, Sung-hyo didn't like this idea, and as soon as they were alone, he told Hyun-jun to stop pursuing Sukryu, as he knows from what his friend shared that she wants to leave their relationship in the past. However, Hyun-jun isn't willing to give up, as we can already tell, and now that he understands he has a competitor, things might get a bit more dramatic. Amidst the men's rivalry for Sukryu, while they were tasting her food, she started experiencing severe stomach pain, which resulted in Hyun-jun rushing her to the hospital. When they arrive, we discover that 3 years ago the protagonist underwent stomach surgery for cancer that developed in that area. Apparently, only her ex-fiancé knows about this, and having her medical records, he was the best person to accompany her at that moment. Going back in time, we see when Hyun-jun proposed to her, and at that time they seemed like a very happy couple, shortly before the cancer was discovered. As soon as Hyun-jun received the news, he took a leave from work to be by his beloved's side and appeared to be a great partner during this difficult period. Sukryu didn't have the courage to tell anyone about her illness at that time, and even after recovering, she kept the secret, so the only one who understands her concern when she felt that pain again is Hyun-jun. The next day, after spending the night worried and wondering if he truly knows his best friend, Sung-hyo decides to take her to eat something comforting. Meanwhile, Sung-hyo's parents seem to be getting along for the first time in a long while, they even shared a meal. Later, Hyun-jun waits for the protagonist after her cooking class, and after they sit in a park to talk, he gives Sukryu a ticket to visit a renowned culinary college. Since she decided to pursue this path, he wishes for her to have the best education. Also in the envelope was her old engagement ring. In the next scene, we see that Danho's article has been published, and Moum spends all her free time reading and rereading the words written by her beloved. Meanwhile, our dear Sung-hyo is not having a good day. Besides having issues with one of his constructions, at the end of the day, Sukryu tells him that her answer to his feelings is that they can only ever be friends. Unfortunately, the man makes it clear that even that is now over. Returning to the past, we discover that the struggle against cancer lasted longer than we imagined. When the protagonist worked with Chris, she was still ill, and the episode we thought her fiancé had cheated on her was just a misunderstanding. Anyway, the two were going through an unstable period in their relationship. Sukryu developed deep depression. We should also consider all the bad things happening at Grape at the time, and Hyun-jun, despite taking very good care of her, just wanted to breathe a bit in his youth, which to him meant going to parties alone. After a painful conversation, where Hyun-jun said she would drag him into the depths too, Sukryu realized their relationship was over. So, back to the conversation in the park, where he handed her the engagement ring again, we learn that Sukryu will never be completely free of the cancer, as it could return at any time. Thus, despite Hyun-jun being a good partner and doing his best, the protagonist knows their relationship cannot be mended, leading to a definitive end for the couple. The next day, after being rejected by his beloved, Sung-hyo falls ill with symptoms of fever and dizziness. Therefore, Sukryu, who didn't take it seriously when he said they wouldn't be friends anymore, stayed by his side until he woke up. Then, While preparing a meal for Sung-hyo, after he accidentally tripped over her bag, he inadvertently saw the results of her exams, which revealed the status of her cancer. Soon, Sung-hyo is overwhelmed by emotions and the fear of losing Suk-ryu consumes him. The two come down the stairs of his house with him in disbelief about the news, and time seems to stop when they encounter the protagonist's mother, who, as soon as she realizes what they're discussing, just thinks about hugging her daughter. At that moment, I confess I cried a lot. Soon, Mi-suk asks her friend to get the car so they can take her daughter to the hospital. However, before her mother could make any decision, the protagonist explains that she already underwent surgery 3 years ago and has kept this a secret ever since. Afterward, the two return home, and now the news spreads to the rest of the family. As soon as he hears about his daughter, the protagonist's father starts feeling unwell, but at the very least, now they know the whole truth, including the fact that Suk-ryu decided to end her marriage because she didn't want to see Hyun-jun suffer because of her. Mi-suk, like everyone else, is deeply shaken by the news. Nonetheless, she feels even more guilt when she thinks about how she treated Suk-ryu when she returned to the country. Looking back to the past, 3 years ago, Sung-hyo went to the US. He even went to the street where his best friend used to live, but upon seeing her with her fiancé, he decided to simply walk away, even though from a distance, he could tell that the protagonist seemed different. After this almost meeting, for some reason, Sung-hyo decided to ignore Suk-ryu's messages. Gradually, the two grew apart, which makes the man feel guilty now, as this was the time she needed support the most. The next day, in the early hours, Mi-suk's group of friends already hears the news. Consequently, Moum also finds out and rushes to talk to her friend. Once again, the protagonist explains the reasons why she kept this secret. However, unlike the others, Moum doesn't judge her best friend, instead, she simply hugs her. Meanwhile, since the protagonist had been at the hospital the previous day and Sung-hyo's father is the head doctor there, it didn't take long for him to find out about Suk-ryu. Kyung-jong then decides to talk to his son about the protagonist's condition and gives his word that he will take care of her health. That evening, Dan-ho is the next to find out when he comes across Moum crying on her way home. After they sit down to talk, we discover that his own daughter almost lost her life 2 years ago following an accident. By some miracle, she survived, but the journey was difficult, as her recovery was challenging. With that said, Dan-ho advises his beloved to cherish every moment with the protagonist. Amid their heartfelt conversation, the couple shares their first kiss. In the next scene, we see Hae-suk with the man her husband suspected she had something going on with. The two meet because the man has something to tell her, and it's not good news. Hae-suk thought she would soon be transferred to another country to continue her work. However, the ministry is planning to dismiss her while offering benefits for her years of service. Returning to the protagonist, the next day, amidst the chaos, Suk-ryu decides to disappear without informing anyone. She goes to the beach and leaves her phone at home. The only one who manages to find her is Sung-hyo, who scolds her as soon as he sees her. Realizing that his friend wouldn't listen to him, the man decides to drag her into the water, and while they stood in the sea, fully clothed, Sung-hyo apologizes for having ignored her when she needed him the most. And now, the best pair of friends have started talking again. Meanwhile, Kyung-jon is thrilled to hear that the results of the protagonist's biopsy show nothing serious. To celebrate, he decides to surprise his wife by picking her up from work. However, when he sees her with the deputy minister again, he once more turns his back and leaves. Returning to the protagonist, her family and closest friends decide to throw her a surprise party since there was no celebration when she returned to the country, and, of course, Suk-ryu loved it. At the same time, at Sung-hyo's parents' house, his father is asking his mother for a divorce. Later that evening, Hyun-jun calls the protagonist one final time. All he wants is to say goodbye because, seeing how happy she is now with her friends and family, Hyun-jun realizes that he no longer fits into her life. However, the man makes it clear that he truly loved her. The next day, Sung-hyo learns of Hyun-jun's departure. And even though he doesn't care much for the man, he drags Suk-ryu to the airport so that they can say their goodbyes. He even thanks Hyun-jun for having taken care of his friend during that time. The following day shows a sweet moment between the protagonist and her parents. Although they still don't like the idea of her being a chef, they now decide to support her dream. However, her mother makes it clear that if Suk-ryu realizes she can't manage, she is welcome to drop everything and return home to stay with her. Meanwhile, focusing on Dan-ho, we discover that his daughter's nanny was injured, and as a result, Moum's mother decides to apply for the job. This creates even more difficulty for Moum, who has been ignoring Dan-ho since that kiss but will now find it tougher to stick to her plan. In the next scene, it is already nighttime, and we see Sung-hyo having dinner with his parents. The couple arranged this meeting to tell him two things. The first is that Hae-suk will be transferred to Africa, which seems contradictory since she had recently been informed she would be dismissed. The second is about their divorce, which, while not shocking, still leaves Sung-hyo somewhat upset. After dinner, while drinking on the street alone, Sung-hyo recalls an argument he overheard years ago between his parents. Hae-suk was venting to her husband about how she believed she should never have gotten married or had a child. She hated how Kyung-jong wanted her to be a housewife, and even though she loved Sung-hyo, she regretted giving birth to him. Returning to the present, it is the protagonist who picks up a passed-out Sung-hyo from the table at the establishment. On their way home, he tells her why he is so upset. The next day, Hae-suk says goodbye to Mi-suk and the protagonist. However, before heading home, Suk-ryu tells her that Sung-hyo is deeply shaken by the recent news. Meanwhile, Moum is at a sauna with Yeon-do and her mother. At one point, the young girl opens up about how much she wishes she had a mother, and Moum explains that everyone goes through a journey in life, and unfortunately, her mother had to leave earlier. Still, Moum adds that she can see Yeon-do's parents in her face, which comforts the child. However, when it comes to Hae-suk's farewell to her son, the situation becomes even more strained. Sung-hyo reveals how hurt he is, expressing how he had always hoped to have a mother, but now it's too late. Back at the office, Sung-hyo encounters the protagonist, who helps him realize that he should say a proper goodbye to his mother because we never know what might happen next. With this in mind, he immediately calls his father to ask about her flight schedule. Kyung-jong informs him that he is at the police station because Hae-suk never boarded the flight and has simply vanished. Since Hae-suk is a very private person, none of the three have any idea where she could be. As such, Kyung-jong decides to call that colleague who seems to have a close relationship with his ex-wife to ask if he knows anything. At this moment, Kyung-jong learns there was no trip at all. In fact, Hae-suk is actually retiring. However, the colleague informs Kyung-jong of a few red flags, such as how Hae-suk has been acting differently lately, sometimes forgetting things that had just been agreed upon. Throughout the day, everyone searched for Hae-suk, checking the places she might be. At a temple where she used to go with her friends, she was found off the trail, disoriented after getting lost but relieved to see familiar faces. Taking advantage of the joy of having found her, Kyung-jong confesses that he'd always missed her every time she left for work, and it seems the couple might now reconcile. Sung-hyo also opens up about his feelings, finishing by saying that he still needs his mother around, which leads everyone to tears. The next day, Sung-hyo leaves for a work trip. In the meantime, the protagonist tries to keep herself busy with other things. However, the man's absence makes her realize her feelings for him. Encouraged by her newfound courage, Suk-ryu goes to find him and confesses her love in a sunflower field, which leads to a kiss. Meanwhile, after years of avoiding it, Kyung-jong finally decides to confront his wife's colleague, the one rumored to be her lover. Amid heated yelling, Kyung-jong discovers the truth: nothing ever happened between the man and Hae-suk. In fact, The colleague doesn't romantically like women, which leaves Kyungjong shocked as he realizes he'd acted certain ways because of his unfounded suspicions. Back to the protagonist, she and Sung-hyo soon return home. However, they don't even need to tell Moum about their relationship, as their behavior alone is enough for their best friend to realize something has changed. This makes her very happy. Moum also has news. She interviewed for a job in Antarctica, and being as dedicated as she is, it's no surprise she was selected. Now, the trio has 2 secrets from the people around them. Despite this, Moum enjoys her remaining time with Yeondu and Dan-ho more than ever. At one point, Moum goes camping with Dan-ho and his daughter. After a fun day, while the little girl is sleeping, Moum opens her heart to Dan-ho. She expresses her desire to be Yeondu's mother and also to be his partner. To her surprise, and mine, Dan-ho's reaction is completely unexpected. His response to Moum's feelings is that she could never be a mother to his daughter and that their relationship wouldn't work. He even adds that the kiss they shared a few days ago was a mistake. Meanwhile, the results of the tests for Haesuk's memory loss show nothing serious. It was diagnosed as short-term memory loss, and with proper monitoring, she can return to living her life normally. Following this, the parents of the protagonist and Sung-hyo decide to take a trip to the beach, leaving our couple alone for the evening. Sung-hyo ends up having dinner at Suk-ryu's house, and afterward, she invites him to read comics in her room, but things go beyond just reading. In the following days, our main couple cherishes every moment together. Meanwhile, Moum is dealing with Dan-ho ignoring her and increasingly distancing Yeondu from her and her mother. Returning to the protagonist, the theoretical test to earn her diploma is over. Now it's time for the practical exam, and as always, Suk-ryu gives it her all. Regarding the new family drama, it revolves around the protagonist's younger brother. The boy decided to become an influencer, and after convincing his mother to invest in some products for him to sell, news broke out that these products were not approved by regulators, were made irregularly, and worse, they were expired. This could lead the boy to jail, and now, Suk-ryu is forced to tell her parents as soon as she finds out. This leaves them extremely disappointed, as by that age their daughter had already graduated and built a successful career. Now, Dong-jin has to call everyone who bought the products, apologize, and promise refunds. But while he was doing this, his sister decided to talk to the youngest sibling alone. Suk-ryu realized that her brother also felt inferior to her, just as she felt inferior to him in terms of their parents' care. However, in Dong-jin's case, throughout his entire life, the two were compared so that he could follow the path of success laid out by the protagonist. Since he failed in everything he tried, this constantly weighed on him. Thus, Suk-ryu explains to her brother that not everyone is special, not even she is. Her life is ordinary, and when she found out about her illness, she became even more certain of that. She simply advises him to find something precious to dedicate himself to, as that will be enough. We know that Suk-ryu found her precious thing, cooking. And when it came to the final practical exam, the results arrived the next day. With her passing, everyone was happy and proud. Meanwhile, Moum was paying tribute to a late colleague who passed away a few years ago after work, and when she was leaving the site, she saw Dan-ho and Yeondu arriving. The scene then cuts to the two standing in front of the spot where the bodies of a couple were laid to rest. When Yeondu begins speaking to them, we discover that her parents were both deceased, not just her mother. I made a mistake because throughout the episodes, the series led us to believe that Dan-ho was Yeondu's father. In fact, she even calls him that, but the man is actually her parents' brother-in-law. And as the two were leaving, they happened to see Moum. In the next scene, while Yeondu plays, we finally learn what really happened. Dan-ho was supposed to go on a family trip with his family, however, due to a delayed report he had to finish, his family left ahead of him while he stayed back to complete his work. As a result, when his family had the accident, he wasn't in the car. On the same day that he lost his parents, his brother, and his sister-in-law, Dan-ho, gained custody of Yeondu. In the following scene, we shift to Dong-jin. Since the only thing that gave him a sense of purpose was working at the neighborhood gym and thinking about becoming a coach, he decided to return there and ask for his old job back. After a heartfelt apology, he was rehired. Back to the protagonist, Sung-hyo left his job and went straight to her house. However, when he entered her room, she wasn't there yet. In the meantime, he started tidying up the mess a bit to please her, and during that process, he stumbled upon some notes and a pamphlet from that culinary university in the United States, the one her ex had mentioned. This quickly turns into an argument between the two. Sung-hyo insists that Suk-ryu doesn't need to study abroad. The issue isn't even about her desire to study overseas, but the fact that she didn't talk to him about it. He fears that she might abandon him again, and now that they're in a relationship, the idea of losing her feels even more painful. Sung-hyo even begins to think that this could be why Suk-ryu wanted to keep their relationship a secret and concludes that he might not be as important to her as he thought. At this moment, the protagonist explains that she thought about attending that university because she isn't able to find a job. She still needs a degree to work in high-level kitchens. Considering her health condition and her age, Suk-ryu has to work much harder than other candidates to convince someone to hire her. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Moum decided to drink alone after a tough day. The one who found her, nearly passed out at her table, was Dan-ho. Taking advantage of the fact that she was chatty, Moum commented that she knows he likes her, but he doesn't want to admit it because he sees her as someone who needs to be protected, like a damsel in distress. However, Dan-ho is forgetting that she knows how to take care of herself just fine. Even though Moum was drunk, she wasn't lying about anything she said. As a result, when Dan-ho took her back to her mother, he told Jae-suk that he likes Moum, wants to have a relationship with her, and asked her not to worry because he knows how to balance his responsibilities with Yeondu and his personal life. However, Jae-suk does not approve of this relationship and tells him not to even think about starting something with Moum. She explains that her daughter has always had a tendency to get attached to people she feels sorry for. Jae-suk advises them to continue pretending that nothing happened between them. The next day, Sung-hyo and Suk-ryu are not speaking to each other after their argument. However, while the architect is visiting one of his ongoing projects, a minor accident occurs, and he ends up in the hospital. As soon as she finds out, the protagonist rushes to the hospital and feels relieved to learn that he only sprained his arm. But by the time this news reaches her, Suk-ryu has already cried quite a bit. Taking advantage of the fact that everything is fine despite her beloved's injury, Suk-ryu tells him she loves him and apologizes for considering leaving the country without discussing it with him first. Later, Moum meets her best friend and updates her about her love life, while Dan-ho does the same with Sung-hyo. Afterward, our main couple helps the new lovebirds meet up. During their conversation, Dan-ho takes the initiative to kiss Moum, and after they make up, the journalist even comments that he will write as many articles as he can to support them financially. Meanwhile, Sung-hyo encourages our dear protagonist to restart her cooking channel on YouTube, which she used to run a few years ago. Suk-ryu decides to give it another try. In the next scene, we shift to the protagonist's parents, who come to a decision about the family restaurant. Since they have gone days without customers and can barely pay the bills, the couple decides to sell everything and enjoy what's left of their lives. After all, their children are grown and able to take care of themselves, so it's finally time for them to relax and enjoy life. Shifting focus to Sung-hyo, he decided a few days ago that he wants to propose to Suk-ryu. The man meticulously planned everything, booking a table at a renowned restaurant and stuffing his car's trunk with flowers. However, when the day finally arrives, everything starts to go wrong. From the water being shut off during his shower to someone crashing into his car, it all prevents him and Suk-ryu from making it to the restaurant. Even so, Sung-hyo presses on. As if things couldn't get worse, at the restaurant, the chef can't finish preparing their dinner because his wife goes into labor. Despite everything, Sung-hyo keeps trying, but when the cake with the proposal message falls to the floor, he finally gives up on proposing on such an unlucky day. Meanwhile, the mothers of the couple start clashing and end up fighting, with one pulling the other's hair. What led to this was a misunderstanding. Mi-suk decided not to join the trip with her group of friends because she's short on money. Hae-suk offered to cover her share, given that the two have known each other for a long time and Mi-suk took care of Sung-hyo from when he was a little boy. However, Hae-suk had always paid for those caregiving services, and it was only when Sung-hyo grew older that she stopped making payments. Because of this, Mi-suk feels that her so-called friend only sees her as a servant, which sparked the argument. Back to the protagonist, her video on the channel featuring a healthy recipe isn't receiving the number of views she was hoping for. However, Suk-ryu was overjoyed to learn that someone undergoing chemotherapy managed to eat a bit more than they usually could after trying her recipe. Sung-hyo, too, was happy when Suk-ryu showed him the comment. Overcome with emotion, he expressed how bad he feels for not being by her side when she needed him most. Riding this wave of emotions, he decided to finally complete what he had spent all day thinking about. Sung-hyo proposed to her. However, Suk-ryu apologized and said she couldn't accept. The next day, Jae-suk happened to see her daughter on the street with Yeon-do and Dan-ho, and after a lot of thought, she finally realized there was no reason to keep opposing their relationship. With this realization, things started to change, and that evening, the family gathered for dinner. Meanwhile, Sung-hyo decided to drink himself into oblivion again, and the restaurant called Suk-ryu to pick him up. On the way home, he asked her why she had rejected his marriage proposal. Essentially, it was because the protagonist didn't want their relationship to end up like her previous one, in which her illness, she believes, prevented her ex from fully enjoying life because he stayed by her side. Even still, Sung-hyo told her that he simply wants to spend whatever time they have together, no matter what. Touched by his words, the two reconciled, and Suk-ryu accepted his proposal. But as fate would have it, both sets of parents happened to be passing by at the exact moment the couple was embracing. The fathers of both families had met earlier to drink and discuss the fight between their wives, which had prompted the women to show up at the restaurant to collect their drunken husbands. When the parents questioned why Sung-hyo and Suk-ryu were there, Sung-hyo decided it was the perfect moment to tell them they were dating. This inevitably turned into yet another topic for their mothers to argue about. Unsurprisingly, their anger toward one another turned into an argument with their children over the relationship. The next day, Moum and Dan-ho decided to tell Yeon-do about their relationship, and when she found out, she loved the news. Later, we see the protagonist's parents telling her and her brother about the closure of the restaurant, which left them quite surprised. But in the end, they understood it was for the best, as the couple no longer had the energy to run the business, especially now that it had lost its customer flow. In the next scene, we see Sung-hyo and his friends deciding to help the elderly woman who works with recyclable waste by renovating her house. By the end, the place looked completely different, so much better, and of course, the woman was deeply grateful. That night, Mi-suk and Hae-suk's friends couldn't stand seeing the two of them fighting anymore. So, they set a trap for the pair. Mi-suk and Hae-suk were locked inside Jae-suk's real estate office. However, even then, there was no way for them to make peace. Their fight turned out even uglier than the last one. However, the next day, the two began to lower the walls they had built in their friendship when one defended the other in a fight against the neighbors, who were bad-mouthing Suk-ryu. The situation even landed them at the police station. But afterward, the two stopped to talk and finally made up. Mi-suk thought Hae-suk didn't want their children together because of the protagonist's illness. However, Hae-suk explained that she never intended to stop them. Her real concern was whether Suk-ryu would be okay. Before the two decided to date, they had always been best friends, and of course, seeing that young girl's suffering also pained Hae-suk. Only after these words did Mi-suk understand her friend's perspective. Now, she began considering giving her blessing to the new couple, especially with Haesuk promising to protect the protagonist as well. And so, everything was resolved. The next day was the family restaurant's final day of operation. To celebrate, Misuk brought all her friends and children to close the place joyfully. Remember that test Moum took to work in Antarctica? Well, she ended up being selected. She was hesitant to tell Dan-ho right after receiving the news, but contrary to her expectations, he fully supported her dreams and said they would wait for her return. Sung-hyo also supported his fiancée's dreams. So, while taking a walk around the neighborhood, he prepared a surprise for her. He renovated the family's old restaurant and handed it over to Suk-ryu so she could prepare her healthy recipes for people to try. Though Sung-hyo executed the project, the idea came from the protagonist's father, and of course, she loved it. That night, our main couple met up with Moum and Dan-ho to throw a small farewell party for Moum, who was leaving for Antarctica for a year of training. But the most emotional goodbye was with her mother, Yeon-do, and Dan-ho. As for the protagonist, the preparations for the restaurant's opening were nearly complete. The cool part? She used her programming skills to develop an app for reservations and takeout orders. Sung-hyo was right when he said every step of her journey was important in shaping who she is today, and that applies to all of us. Regarding our lovebirds' wedding, it was postponed for a year, until the restaurant stabilized and Moum returned to the country. But Sung-hyo's parents decided to renew their vows with a beautiful celebration. 10 months later, we see Sung-hyo receiving the title of city architect, and the protagonist's restaurant became a huge success. The friend group remained close, and Dong-jin was also focused on his career. He passed the exam to become a personal trainer and was already working at the gym. As for Dan-ho, he secured a spot to write an article about a research project in Antarctica, allowing him to reunite with Moum earlier than planned. Haesuk decided to publish a book sharing her 30 years of experience as a diplomat, and Misuk kept improving her English skills. As for the couple, they now had the house blueprints ready, all that was left was for construction to begin. The only complaint I have about this drama is that we didn't get to see the actual wedding. But I can't deny it had a great story and well-developed characters. What did you think of this season? I hope you enjoyed the recap. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and share it to support me. See you next time.